How does one become a polymath?
All right. So the first thing to start would be good to define polymathy. When we take a look at dictionaries, we just see sentences like wide-ranging knowledge or polymath is a person that knows a lot about things in different domains or in different areas. And then in my studies, I try to condense this idea of polymathy into factors. And I came towards three factors based on my literature research on how people have been describing polymath since ancient Greece. By the way, the word was coined in ancient Greece almost 500 years before Christ. And the three factors, or the three elements that I came, were breadth, depth, and integration. So breadth refers to the extension of your knowledge, knowing things in different domains such as arts, sciences, sports, which is very neglected, by the way. Depth is how profound you delve into each domain, or how professional you can be, or the degree of expertise you attain in a certain domain. And integration is the most tricky factor, but it's extremely important. The great polymaths are able to integrate their different interests, their different vocations and avocations into a synergistic whole, as Robert Ruth Bernstein, a scientist, says. So the greatest polymaths, they don't see things in the way that most people do. This task belongs to the domain of tanana, and this activity pertains to this domain. They tend to see things in a more connective way. And then they can bring different things together, or things that seem very distant for most people. They can find connections there. So that's the last factor, which I call integration. So how does one become a polymath? It's easy, let's say. You just have to work yourself on the three of these domains. Of course, it's a joke. It's not easy to do that, but you have a pathway. Some people start with breadth. They start with many interests. They perhaps have many natural abilities. They are intelligent people and they have, let's say, a good voice and they like sports. Just one example. And the person doesn't want to be just one of these things. So the person wants to pursue, or at least to hone their skills in sports and sing and use their intelligence towards science, let's say. So the person starts with these predispositions, with these abilities, and then they continue working on that until they reach at least a somewhat profound level, sometimes a professional level. So let's take Einstein. Einstein is not so commonly associated with polymathy, but he has practiced the violin since a young age. And we have many records of Einstein saying that if he would not become a physicist, he would be a musician. And besides, and more importantly, we have many reports of him saying how his thinking was informed by his experience, by his exposure to this musical realm. So his imagination was informed by how the sound moves, by how the strings work to generate this.
And that alludes to the integration aspect of it, right?
Yes, sure, totally. You get it.
The breadth and the depth, I could teach that, you know. Let's say I wanted to teach depth, we'll study maths every day for the next year, and we'll have some sort of depth within math domain. And breadth, okay, we study something new every day for a year, and we have some sort of breadth. How do you teach the last aspect, integration? Because, like you said it yourself, it's a little tricky.
Yeah, that's the trickiest. Yes. And that's why I insist so much on this factor, because that's the key. Breadth and depth. You already have at school. School teaches depth. School teaches breadth. but people don't leave school being polymaths. Why? So there is a missing piece. That's what I never liked in the previous descriptions and definitions of polymathy. There was a missing piece, and this missing piece I call integration. And how do you teach it? In fact, it's like how you teach a habit. So first, you need some personal dispositions, some personality traits. Many geniuses, like Leonardo, like Einstein, even like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, they have this contrarianism trait. They don't like to swim along the crowd. Because, in fact, there are connections, but they are already mapped by most people and by traditional wisdom of the domain. When you learn mathematics, in fact, you are learning a series of past integrations that past geniuses made, like Euler and Pythagoras and whatever. It was not there before. For example, before Pythagoras in his school, there was not an integration between how algebra and triangles worked. Before that, perhaps triangles were in the domain of drawing and algebra was something different. Of course, they didn't have our notation and our knowledge, but just to give you an example, when we go to school, we are learning about past integrations. The problem is, how do you make novel integrations that are useful, something that adds to the knowledge? Because integrations per se, novelties per se, have no meaning. I can put a chair over the computer and, okay, nobody did that, but what's the usefulness? What does it bring to the field of computing or art? So the thing is almost like a paradox, because people make integrations all the time, but it's rare to make integrations that are novel and work. So one thing is you have to be more or less free to try. You should have some degree of constraints when you try new things. For example, it's a bad advice to tell students, do whatever you want. This is not conducive to creativity, as most studies in the creativity domain say. You should give some constraint. So let's say an English class or a language class. Let's try to write a poem. And then you teach the different structures of writing poems. So let's choose one. And then you're learning depth. This is the traditional sonnet structure. And then you learn the sonnet structure. And then you learn another structure. And then you learn another way of breaking with the sonnet structure. After they know these different structures, they could be asked, so how could you create a new structure? You see how different the problem is posed. So it's a more kind of a finding a new way of posing good questions and then trying to answer them. It's more like an art. There are some techniques, like just what I told you, instead of saying, do whatever you want or create a poem. It's better first to give students resources so they have a database on what already works. And then they can try different permutations, different ways of doing things, but they have some material, proven material to begin with. And then they start doing new permutations, new tryouts. And most of them, and we can think of Edison's lamp as an example, will be failures. Most of them. If you have a class where each failure you get punished, this is going to be very, very unconducive to creativity. So you must learn how things are done. This is important. This is for the depth dimension. If you don't learn how things are provenly done, you are going to end up with recreations. So you're not going to advance the domain. You're not going to be really creative because you're doing something that people did in the past. So you need the depth to understand what works. And then after that, you can try to create new integrations that might work. So if you want to train, let's say you want to give a business training, you first want to make sure that everybody knows the best practices before. And then they try to investigate these practices. They try to make a structure on that. And then they try to generate new ways of solving or of tackling this problem. And what will generally happen is that a new interesting question will arise. And then over this new interesting question, people will start thinking differently, will start trying new solutions. But if you don't do this prior work, I really think it's hard to come with real novelty, with real useful value.
It sounds like that requires a lot of time to learn and think about all those things. Is that something anyone can do? Or is it just for an elite few?
Okay, so that's a good question. And what people in the field of creativity have thought. We have different degrees of creativity. When we think about polymath, and then Leonardo comes to mind, most people think, oh, polymathy, great, so Leonardo was a polymath, but it's not for everyone, okay? It's for just the selected geniuses. And you have creativity throughout your life in all levels. Of course, the greatest degree of creativity requires a lot of learning because you have a lot of accumulated knowledge in mankind, which is much, 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 much higher than what we had from the time of Leonardo. That's one factor why we don't see so many Leonardo nowadays, because at his time, the structured knowledge of mankind was minimal compared to what we have today. And the amount of people trying to generate new knowledge was very much smaller as well. So Leonardo was a very talented person who had the opportunities, let's say, at a time where discoveries could be made in his workshop. Nowadays, depending on the field, we have to be a member of a lab to have the opportunities, to have access to the state-of-art material, to be able to make a discovery. Let's say in genetics. You don't do it in your garage. It's different from the 600s. But we have creativity operating all the time at a professional level. People in normal departments. We were in the journalism department. So how can we make some story more interesting? This is about creativity as well. So you have to learn when you become a journalist. You go to school to learn how to make good stories, to learn the principles of writing. And it took you at least 4 years to receive a certificate that you went through all this training. But your learning didn't stop there. When you are in your department, perhaps talking with colleagues or your boss, you're always trying to come up with novel and useful and effective ways of telling stories, of solving problems, and it is true to every professional. So you don't need to reinvent journalism. I don't know how one could do that because this is not my field, but every professional faces this problem. And nowadays, with the world being even more connected, even more volatile, complex, and ambiguous, we need to do it even more often, not to become irrelevant due to new technologies. In the past, you could be a great welder, let's say, and you could boast about your welding skills. And then comes a robot, does that without being sick, with perfect precision. Perhaps in the future there will be automation in telling stories. I don't know. I could be talking to artificial intelligence. So we have new challenges, and
so is it going to become increasingly difficult to sort of obtain a polymath status or like reach a polymath level at a very high level? Is it becoming harder?
I would say that integration will become increasingly important.
Okay.
Because robots will be able, or automation will be able to acquire depth very fast. That's what machines can do. They can play chess like nobody else. They can build one type of thing very well, but this machine that builds cannot do anything else. The machine that does chess cannot do anything else. So this capacity of having these three things is what all humans are going to resort more to. So I think that's going to be the opposite. Humans will need to become more polymathic and more integrated to, let's say, compete with machines. So if we compete just in the domain of depth, it's more risky. And what is increasingly difficult, which is a normal and natural movement, is the accumulated knowledge is becoming higher in its exponential. It will be difficult to acquire depth at the highest level in many domains. And that's something that we have seen happening. But we are going to perceive more and more how some connections can be made. For example, once you learn the principles of methodology in the hard sciences, I can apply it to economics, I can learn econometrics, and that's not so different from psychometrics. You know, there are mathematical principles that cross those domains. So the problem about this thinking that you have to start from scratch, or the 10,000 hour rule, the problem about that is once you reach to a certain level of general understanding of how some part of reality works, you can apply that to other domains. You don't have to go back to zero. You already have an understanding of, let's say, this reality.
But how much of that transfers? Because if I do 10 years of piano lessons, I'm not going to become a good chef.
Yeah, we have, let's say, two possibilities to become an eminent person, to give a contribution. One is through performance, becoming a performer, and becoming a pianist or a violinist of the highest level means I'm a performer and I have to compete with a lot of other performers, and that does not transfer. That does not transfer. But if you want to become a creator, I want to become a composer. It's much more transferable if you want to become a writer, a playwright. Composing in two different domains has a common creative antecedent. When you compose music, you tend to face some similar kinds of problems that you face when you compose a text.
Well, I guess with that example, you could say I compose a text, I compose a meal, I follow a recipe, I follow some notes. There are some similarities.
Yes.
Or what do you mean? What do you mean?
No. What I mean is the kind of problems are similar when you create. For example, why most people don't create state-of-art new things? There are some common barriers to create new stuff that when you start creating at any domain, and it's different from performing. So when you are a great violinist, you are a great performer. And when you're a great cook, you're probably a performer too. But when you compose, when you mix new notes in music, you are a composer. You're not playing Bach or Beethoven. You are making new pieces in music. And when you are making new pieces of, let's say, when you're making new food, you're also mixing new pieces, but it's not of sound, it's of flavor. So there are some similar problems that you face. So how can I mix notes and flavors in a different way? Of course, you have to learn all the basic structure of mixing notes, for example, chords and scales. And I'm pretty sure, I'm not a great cook, but I'm pretty sure in this domain, when you become a great cook, they already know how the harmony of flavors. The same thing, you already know the harmony of notes. You know that do, mi, sol is the major chord. So I believe with a lot of confidence that they do have this consecrated harmonies in flavor. But if you want to be creative, you have to know how to break or how to add to this wisdom of harmony and doing something that's good and new and perhaps surprising in a dish. Do you understand? So creative people face some kind of similar problems in any domain, but performers, perhaps they don't, because they reproduce what the traditional wisdom, let's say, and they add their touch. The people who are in the field, they can distinguish, oh, this is Yoma, because he brings his personal touch, or a chef brings his personal touch.
Sure.
But
So you've touched this a little bit already with the specializing robots, but what are some of the advantages of being a polymath?
all right. Well, one advantage is that in an increasingly volatile and uncertain and complex and ambiguous world, you have more resources to make important contributions or to solve problems that are difficult and that require this kind of integration that a robot cannot solve. In the social level, when we have polymathic people in a department, we can enhance, for example, how can department A connect to department B, which is a very big problem in business sometimes, that there is a cross-disciplinary or cross-department problem, and there is nobody to make this connection. And this person ideally should have depth and breadth. Perhaps he comes from one department and learns a little bit from the other and integrates these two different departments. So I talked about the importance of being relevant in today's world, the likelihood to solve difficult, ambiguous problems which robots can't do, to build bridges between areas, departments, disciplines that don't talk well. And if they talked, they could solve more problems, they could become more relevant. And it all leads to the creation of new and better things that everybody in society can enjoy. So when you create a great new product in a business and you sell it successfully, people are enjoying something novel that can bring joy to them.
That sounds very good. But when I started researching polymaths, I was taken aback by how little I knew about it and how little people talk about polymaths and just knowing a lot of stuff in general. So what are some of the challenges? Why don't we hear or see more of it? You know, yeah.
Yeah. So let's go back to the polymath path that I forgot to mention. So naturally, a person does not become a polymath out of nothing or magically. So there is a series of steps, what I call polymathic path. I talked a little bit how some people start with breadth and then they delve into different domains. Some people start as specialists and then they open up their horizons. But of course, there is an ability component. I gave the example of the person who can sing, who has a general intelligence, and who is good at sports. It's not difficult. You can find in your class, you can remember your class and think about a person who is intelligent, and a person who sings or has a beautiful voice, and a person who is good at sports. But when you bring those three elements together, if they are independent, that becomes a rare combination. Let's say if one is 10%, the second one is going to be 1% of people who have these two, let's say, talents. And with three, it's 0.1%, assuming they are independent, and I think they are not, but just for the sake of example. So you're looking at 0.1% to find a person who is likely to be great at science, great at sports, and great at singing. It can happen, but only taking a 10% threshold with the three in combination, it becomes very rare. So we have this one first stage of rarity, which is personal abilities. And of course, the person needs the disposition, must be willing to enhance themselves in the three domains. So that's the second cut. Third cut, the person needs opportunities. So if the person has all these abilities, all these interests, but the person is born in a poor country with no singing schools, with no science schools, and with little opportunity to professional sports, it's not going to become a real polymath. The person's going to stay as a potential. So opportunities are very, very important. And that's why we had polymaths in Florence, in England, in all those great civilizations.
As part of this article, I've done sort of a world map of famous polymaths throughout history. Needless to say, there are fewer in Africa than there is in Europe, right?
Yes. So one bad thing that I see is this idea of the genius who will become a genius nevertheless. It's not true. Geniuses, they need a large array of opportunities. They need resources channeled to them. Leonardo started at 14, if I'm not wrong, as an apprentice. If he had to work, I don't know, as a miner, mining coal, let's say, just an example, how could he use his hands to do such a delicate work? He would be tired. His hands would be not as delicate, or his dexterity would be harmed by his work, but he would have no choice. Perhaps because in his city, people are miners, just as an example, as an exercise of imagination. So Leonardo would never arise in such a city, in such a society. So, how can I say, the flourishing of polymaths are strictly connected to the amount of opportunities that people have, to the amount of resources that are channeled to these higher human pursuits, like science, like arts, or like being the best performer at sports. It's not something that comes automatically. So we have a lot of sieves. You have the personal sieves of ability. You have the personal sieve of disposition, of personality characteristics. The person can be a potential polymath, but may not want to be one, may not want to become one, may want to become a specialist. And of course, the sieve of opportunities is the worst one. So there are many, many, many potential polymaths everywhere in the world who have to do other things instead of honing their skills to the greatest level.
But polymathy isn't for everyone. It's for, I mean, a lot of people, but not everyone.
The problem is not polymath isn't for everyone. Many people have the potential, many people have the desire, but the opportunities are not distributed to everyone. It's not true.
But does everyone have the potential as well? I think that's my question.
Okay, potential. So that's a good
everyone
question.
Have the potential?
Yeah, so the potential to become a polymath at the professional level, like the example that I said, in the journalism you come with a new thing, I would say that most people have this potential. They just don't tap into this potential. They just haven't realized that they can make better integration, that they can try more because their education was not conducive to that. But of course, if you ask me, how many people have the potential to become the greatest person in science and arts and sports, it's going to be very difficult because the person will need all those opportunities. And there are, especially in sports, there are time frames, there are windows that you can be a sportsman. You cannot start a sports career at 40. You have to start at an early age. So we have these challenges.
Well, that goes for sports, but that essentially goes for everything. Time is limited for all of us, right?
Yeah, but the window of opportunity to become a professional sports person is
even more limited. Yeah.
Than to become a writer. I can start a writing career at 60. I see no problems with that. That's why I distinguish being a performer from being a creator. And what happens is that when you go to the intellectual level, and creators at the intellectual domains, they tend to be much more polymathic than you think. Even Stephen Hawking, he tried to write little poems. It's not something that people disseminate. But many people that we think are specialists, like Einstein, they had various interests in different domains. Nabokov, I love his example. Everybody knows Nabokov as the writer of Lolita. but he was an avid and professional entomologist. He studies insects, their structure, how to systematize the types of butterflies and moths. So this ability to systematize the things and the challenges that he encountered in systematize the features of insects, he probably used the same abilities or the same problem-solving skills when he described it so beautifully, the scenes and the people involved in his novel. So you see, when you go to the intellectual creative domain, it's much more interdisciplinary and the problems can be more connected. So once you reach a very high level in one domain, it's much easier to find opportunities in other domains. When nobody knows you, you knock on many doors and they do not open. But when you get known in one domain, you knock any door and it opens automatically. So it's unfair that when you are already there, the opportunities are greater. That's one of the problems that we have. I think for me, the greatest problem is to build systems where opportunities are more well distributed, and this kind of thinking, this kind of trying, this kind of exploring is also encouraged without neglecting the depth. It's not do whatever you want. It's let's learn what was done in the past that works, and let's try to overcome that. And I would say most people are afraid to try to overcome what the great people in the past have done. So not
solving an issue like that, distributing wealth and opportunity more evenly, seems like an issue for a polymath, a complex issue like that.
Very good point. So I see many people talking about that, but then I see them making very strong assertions. And I ask them, do you understand how finance works? They don't. So if you try to meddle with the system without understanding some of the fundamentals of the system, you are likely to come up with a bad solution. So inviting polymathic people would be very important in this discussion of how to create a system that works and that works in a better way. Because if you don't understand the fundamentals, you can't make positive change. It's very unlikely. And most people who are making all those strong assertions, I sometimes feel that they lack so much about the basic understanding of how our system works. And you have to put aside ideology for that. And it's very difficult because it's ingrained in most people's beliefs and how they think. It's ingrained with ideology. And you have to make all kinds of questions. When you are subscribed to ideology, you just make some kind of questions. Other kinds of questions are prohibited because they are questions that the other side makes. So this multilateralism is something that should be encouraged in society. And the problems that we are having in Europe, in the United States, even here in Brazil, and it's so sad to see that some people just ask some kinds of questions and the other half of people just look at this kind of questions, and that's not the good way to solve a complex problem. So we need to invite polymaths to the discussion.
So how likely, if I can ask that, how likely is polymathy, you know? And
Okay.
And sort of answer it in less than a minute.
Okay. Yeah. So how likely is polymathy? So we have a kind of polymathy that works in the professional level. So we call them professional polymaths, which are people who bring novelty to their work, but they are not necessarily doing creative genius stuff. I think it's very likely. So anybody who is a good professional or who wants to be a good professional, this person can be a professional polymath. This person needs to integrate more stuff, more knowledge, epistemic knowledge, and experience from other domains. It's very likely. But to become a creative genius in many domains, to win a Nobel Prize in chemistry and physics, it's of course very unlikely, because the accumulated knowledge of mankind is so big that to reach the top at two different areas becomes such an increasingly difficult task. But I would say that there are challenges that once you learn how to deal, especially creative challenges, you can use this knowledge, or you can build a tool set that's useful across domains. So it's not uncommon. In fact, it's very common to see geniuses of one domain having experience developing serious interests in other domains. So that would be my answer. Professional polymathy should be encouraged, is likely, and genius level polymathy is of course rare, but it's less rare than most people think. If you check the lives of great inventors and creators, you're gonna find stances of polymathy. All right?
Very good. Very good. And you said you've been struggling a bit with the complexity of the subject and people not understanding what you mean. That answer right there was very good and very easy to understand.
Matthias, anything else?
No, I don't think so. You've been great.
Okay, thank you very much. It's nice to talk to you, by the way.